Today's talk is on turbo boosting your productivity on the cluster with tmux. And like Alex, I use tmux everywhere. I use it at home. I use it for work. And I particularly use it on the clusters that are part of the Alliance, the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And so I do have a link to my slides here if you want them. I can give them to you later too, but I'll get started. Whoops. I have a layout of my screen here where you're going to see my keystrokes up here and the slides over here, and I'll be working on a terminal over in this part of the screen. Okay, so here's an outline of what I'll be talking about today. So first I'll talk about the motivation for using tmux, in particular, some of the problems that it solves. Then I'll talk about what tmux actually is. And then I'll talk about how do you do some things in tmux. And specifically, I'll be going through some examples on the cluster of using tmux. And so those last two items in that list are not really sequential. They're sort of mixed together. I'll be switching between some demos and some teaching some stuff. And if you want to watch this webinar, that's great. You're also invited to follow along with the webinar. So if you like, log into your favorite cluster and you can start using tmux there. Some things you won't be able to do. I'll just be going too quick, but other things, learning the basics of tmux, you'll be able to follow along if you like. And yeah, I'll log into a cluster myself in a moment. So yeah, let's talk about some of the problems that we're trying to solve here. So the first problem is you or I, depending on your viewpoint, have a SSH connection to a cluster that keeps dropping. So you're doing some work and all of a sudden you get something like connection reset by peer, or some other network issue causes your SSH connection to drop. And that's a real pain, because if you've done a lot of setup for getting your work done, you lose all that work that you've done. You know, if you're running an interactive job on the cluster, that interactive job is going to go away. And we'd like to prevent that. And tmux will help us out there. Another issue that sometimes comes up is you're working on a cluster and you run a command and you're waiting for that command to run, but you want to do other stuff on the cluster at the same time. And it'd be one solution to that is just SSH in another terminal window into the cluster, and then you can wait for your one thing to finish while having another window and running some other commands there. But tmux provides an elegant solution to this problem of wanting to do more than one thing at the same time. Another issue is maybe you're running something that's taking really long and you're sitting in the library or at your office and you realize that in a few minutes your bus is coming and you got to go, but your command hasn't finished running. And if you shut down you close the lid on your laptop, you're going to lose all your work again. So yeah, concrete example might be building some software on a cluster that'll take hours to do, and you got to shut down your laptop for whatever reason. Well, tmux will help you keep on going even when your laptop is offline. And another interesting example is maybe you want to share your working session with two different computers. tmux has a solution for that too. So what is tmux? So tmux stands for Terminal Multiplexer. And you can think of it as a multiplexer, something that takes a bunch of inputs and then allows you to select which one becomes the output. So in this case, the inputs are bash sessions and the output is your terminal. And you get to select what you want to see at any given time. And you can switch between these different inputs. So in concrete terms, tmux allows you to run multiple sessions in a single terminal, but it also allows you to detach and reconnect to sessions. So yeah, and these are the features that solve the problems that I mentioned earlier. And so yeah, I'll just mention that tmux is installed on the alliance clusters. So for people who aren't aware of what the alliance is, there used to be this organization called Compute Canada, and it morphed into another organization called the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So Compute Canada, the former Compute Canada is part of that. And we just call it the Alliance because Digital Research Alliance of Canada is kind of a long name. And yeah, so I'm gonna SSH into Graham today. And here I am. And yeah, tmux is installed on Graham and on Cedar. Beluga and Narval are probably down today. So if you want to follow along with some of the basics, feel free to. You probably want to use Cedar or Graham. You can install tmux on your own computers. Doing it on Windows might be a little tricky, but on Linux, it's super easy to install tmux. On Mac OS, you might need to use something like Homebrew. But quite often when I'm working with a cluster, I'm running tmux on the cluster. So feel free to log into a cluster if you want to follow along. So there's three important concepts in tmux. One is session, another is window, and the other is pane. So sessions are just the different running instances of tmux. Quite often you just run tmux once. So you have one session running of tmux, but you might have multiple depending on what kind of work you're doing. Windows are a way of stacking sort of like desktops within a session. So you could, yeah, basically you can think of one window being on top that you're looking and the other being things that you're not touching right now that are in the background. So you can think of that as being the windows in tmux, having one on top that you're working on and then a bunch of that are kind of dormant waiting for you to work on them. And then there's this concept of panes. So any window in tmux you can split into different sections that you can do different, you can do work in each section independently. And so they're kind of like panels. So yeah, so the relationships are that a session can have one or more windows and a window can have one or more panes. And so these are the concepts we'll be looking at today. And so let's start by running tmux. So I'm on the cluster, I'm gonna write the word tmux. And so what happens is it looks like I'm in a bash session, just like I was before I typed tmux, but now I have this green bar at the bottom of my terminal window. And you'll see there's a, on the left-hand side in square brackets, there's a number 0, and we'll find out that that's our session number. There's a number 0:bash, and that's our window number. And there's some information about the machine that we've logged into. And this is very important. Keep in mind which login node you've logged into. So in my case, it's gra-login2. For you, it might be a different machine, but just keep in the back of your mind which machine it was that you logged into. So yeah, there's this green bar has some information. It even has the time. And yeah, if you want to leave tmux, you just type exit or Control D, and now I'm out of tmux. But I want to be in tmux, so I'm going to type tmux again, and I'm back in again into tmux. And so I have my session running, and if I want to list all the sessions, there's tmux ls, ls standing for list sessions, and it'll show me I have a session called session 0. It has one window. It was created at this particular time, and it's currently attached. So I'm currently looking at it. That's what that means. So yeah, there's a bunch of commands you can run in tmux, and all tmux commands start with the prefix Control B. So they're kind of like hotkeys, but Control B is the thing that activates the hotkeys in tmux. And so a couple of really important hotkeys for new users. One is Control B. So I'm going to press Control, hit B, and let go of both keys. And then I'm going to hit the question mark. Control B, question mark. And this gives me a help screen about the commands in tmux. So you'll see a bunch of C-B, that stands for Control B, followed by another either set of keys or single key, and this help screen tells you about a bunch of very useful ones. And I can scroll through this help list. It looks like there's 47 lines of text if you look at this little orange thing in the corner. And once I'm finished looking at help, I press Q. By the way, feel free to ask questions as you have them. Either you can unmute and ask, or ask in the chat while I'm moving along talking about tmux.
Chris, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Since you opened it up. When would you use, say, tmux over something like Screen that does something quite similar, but slightly different? Why would you choose one over the other?
Yeah,
Screen is older for sure. Yeah,
it is for
that's
sure.
why I know it.
Yeah. So yeah, you can use both. I mean, I've used Screen a handful of times over the years. So for me, I found tmux to be more intuitive, and it's also a lot newer. So it may have some features that Screen doesn't have, but I can't really speak to that too much.
Is that what Marie means by not as powerful? That Screen is not as powerful? It's in the chat, so I'm just, powerful is nebulous. I need something a bit more concrete than that.
Yeah,
Yes, I meant in terms of features.
Thank you. Okay,
there are very many things that have been implemented in tmux that were never implemented in Screen, because I don't think that Screen is under development anymore.
No,
it's a very old tool. So if Screen is good enough for you, you're familiar with it, if it does anything you want of it, I guess that's fine. But tmux is under development. It's more modern. So if you're tempted to try a new tool that will have additional features and is being developed actively, you could give it a try.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll just mention that, over the years, I noticed new features in there. They're all really great. And yeah, so we'll see some of those features today. And if you like Screen, stick with Screen. If there's some nice features that you see in tmux, you might want to give it a try though. Okay, so that was so we've learned about the command prefix, which is Control B, and we saw our first feature, which was the help. So I used Q to get out of the help there. And another feature is I can detach from my session. So if I press Control B and then follow it with the D key, I'm now out of tmux. I can list my sessions again, tmux ls, and I see my session is still going, but it no longer says that it's attached. And if I do want to attach my session again, I just type tmux attach. Whoops, if I can spell it. And there we go. I'm back into that same session again. So just to prove that nothing's up my sleeve here, I can list some files, and I can go Control B, detach D, and then reattach again. And I see that same file listing as I did before. So it's the same session as before. Okay. So here's a demo. So I'll just mention again that an important note about login nodes is pay attention to what login node you've connected to. And so I'll show you an example of where I get detached and then I can rejoin my session. So let me just go to a different directory here. And I'll do an ls, have some output, and all of a sudden I get detached. Now you may not know this, but there's a hotkey in SSH that detaches you. It drops your connection. And that one is tilde . So squiggle dot. Whoops, look at that. I'm now off of Graham, and I'm on my home machine, La Loquesia. And so I just, I took some time to CD into a directory on Graham and do some stuff, and now I'm disconnected. And this can happen to you for many reasons, where you get disconnected from a cluster. And so let's go back and reattach to tmux. So I'll SSH back into Graham. Here I'm kind of lucky. So it says I'm connected to login 2, which is the same, gra login 2, which is the same server that I was before. Now, if it turned out that I wasn't on the same server as before, I could always SSH to the you know, maybe the whatever server it was. So for example, if it was raw login 1, once I connect to Graham, I could reconnect to the same server. But luckily, I was connected to Gra login 2, so I'm not going to need that. And I can do a tmux ls, and there's my session, and I can do tmux attach. And yeah, so that's I'm attached to the same session. So if I was doing something fancy like building some software, I'll just copy paste this. Here's me rebuilding Python, although I don't know why anyone would ever want to do this. I just want an example of something that's going to run for a long time. And then all of a sudden, while I'm waiting for it to my software to build, it's doing some stuff. I'm gonna, whoops, accidentally detach SSH back into Graham. Luckily, and actually it's not luck, I'm connected to Gra login 2. So why is it not luck? It turns out that I have an SSH session that keeps, or setting that keeps my previous SSH session kind of reconnected. So I always, whenever I SSH into Graham, I connect to Gra login 2. But I won't cover that particular setting. But anyways, once I'm back onto the cluster, I can reattach, and there's you can see my software is still building. I didn't lose anything, and it works pretty good. So I'm gonna Control C out of this software build and just mention that tmux acts as an insurance policy for network problems, and so that's one of my favorite features of tmux. So let's what did I do? I think I went the wrong way with my slides. Yeah, so let's talk about panes. So panes are this nice way of organizing your work into different sections. So you can split your screen. In particular, you can split it vertically with Control B, %, and horizontally with Control B, quotation mark. And you notice that both of these symbols have kind of something getting split. So the % looks like something getting split, and the quotation mark looks like something, you know, 2 lines. So it looks like something kind of getting split. So that's one way to remember them. So if I do Control B followed by %, my screen now has 2 sections, one on the left and one on the right. If I do Control B followed by the quotation mark, the right hand part of my terminal is now split into up and down portions. And the way to navigate between the various sections, so I have 3 sections of my terminal right now, is I can press Control B and an arrow key. So Control B up, you can see my mouse or my cursor is moving to the different sections. If I do Control B left, I've moved to the left part of the screen. You also notice this little green bar here kind of changes when you, depending on what part of the screen you're on. And if you're really quick, you can press Control B once and then multiple arrow keys to move around for navigation. So I can, whoops, if you're quick enough. So I was quick enough to do a few changes with only one Control B, but yeah, that's another feature, and you can split these things kind of ad nauseum. Whoops. What did I just do? Okay, Control B. So it's getting a little ridiculous here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sections to my terminal right now, and I can type commands into any one of them. And yeah, so that's the main feature of panes, is you can create them, and then you can switch between the different parts of your screen. And once you're finished with a pane, you just type exit and it goes away. Or the other alternative is to press Control D, which means the same thing as exit. So Control D, Control D. Now I'm down to 2 panes. And yeah, maybe I'll create three panes for now. And another feature is you can change the proportion of the screen that these panes take up by pressing Control B, holding down the Control key, and then hitting some arrow keys. So I'm going to press Control B, hold down Control, and press the left arrow a bunch of times. Control B, Control left. You can see I'm resizing my panes. So I can press Control B, Control up, and change which proportion of the screen, just resize my panes, which yeah, might help see some output. This is a feature that I really like. So let's say I've got a really small pane and I want to run a command like, I'll do htop. I can barely see anything in that pane. But one of the nice things you can do is you can maximize any given pane. So I'm in the pane that's showing htop, and I can press Control B Z. And now that pane has taken up the whole screen, and I can see all the output. And if I want to toggle back to the normal viewing mode, I can press Control B Z again. So Control B Z, make it big, Control B Z, make it small. And so you can switch to another pane and do the same thing, and so on. And yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, now I'm going to do a demo, and it's going to use some features of Slurm. So what is my, whoops, yeah, there we go. So my demo is I'm going to submit a file to the or a job to the cluster. That's going to use the GPU or a GPU. So it's going to use one core, four gigs of memory, one GPU, and it's going to load some Python, or I'm going to load Python as a module in CUDA. I'm going to activate a virtual environment, and then I'm going to run some code that runs a Python script that computes all the prime numbers that are less than 5 million. And I'll use GPU to do that. So let me submit this, and I'm going to Control BZ this to get it big. And I'll try with one of my default accounting groups or what do you call them? I call them accounting groups. They're called something else nowadays. It's taking a bit of time. It's the problem when you're doing live demos. Come on, Graham, start my job. Or submit my job at least. Yeah, Slurm right now might be in bad shape. On Cedar, or sorry, Graham. Control C and try again.
You could also try using the staff account for extra priority.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's not even communicating to Slurm, so it doesn't matter what account I'm going to use. So I'll do what Camille said, though, because Camille is often right about these things. This is a secret staff account. Is that going to work? Okay.
You could also try interactive. There's usually reserved resources for that.
Yeah, I think it's this sort of Slurm daemon or whatever that's not working. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch to Cedar. And because I have the same file there. I just hope that there aren't problems on Cedar too. There we go. Good, always good to have a backup cluster. It's funny, when I was working on these slides, I was working on Beluga, but Beluga is down for the day, so I had to pivot. Okay, so my job is still pending. Let's try. Just to be sure, maybe one of my default accounts will work. It's always good to have a backup account. Oh yeah, it is working for my default account. Okay, so I have a job running. This is the ID here. And yeah, maybe I want to monitor it. So what I can do is I can attach to that running job. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this way. I think it'll help see the monitoring going on. So I'll do srun minus job ID. And so the second job is the one that's running right now. And set up a sudo terminal running bash. And while that's setting up, I'll just mention my coworker Mark Hahn said the other day, breaking news, Slurm is picky and subtle, because we were trying to attach to the same job twice and it was having all sorts of problems, mainly because of the GPU involved in the job. And so we had to add a couple extra flags to get the second attaching to the job to work. So yes, Slurm definitely is picky and subtle. So I have 2 attachments to my running job, which is running right now, and one has access to a GPU and one doesn't. So on the one that has access to the GPU, I can every 3 seconds I'll run NVIDIA SMI, and we can see, well, there's a GPU working at 100% computing these primes. And up here, I can say, okay, I'm attached to the job. So you'll notice that instead of Cedar 1, which is now my new login node, I'm connected to Cedar 255, which is where my job is running. And I can run htop. And so, yeah, now I'm monitoring my job in 2 different windows. If I want, I can always press Control-BZ and make one of these monitoring windows full screen. I might also want to do, oops, I'm going to split this vertically now. And there is my output file. And I can take a look at what output I'm getting so far in another pane. So I've got these 3 panes running. Here's Slurm telling me, or sorry, the Numba library telling me that I'm not really using my GPU as efficiently as I could. But yeah, so I can do some monitoring of my job by attaching to it. And I have all these nice panes set up so that I can monitor different features of my job. And yeah, are there any questions about this? Okay, so there's a demo of yeah, monitoring a job with tmux helping out. So yeah, and I'll just mention that there's you know, we can run multiple sessions. So let's by default you can't run tmux inside of tmux, but you can detach and create another tmux session. So I'll detach from this session. Oh, look, it's outputting my prime numbers right now. So my job is about to end. And in fact, I'm getting these messages in my attached panes that the job's ending, and Slurm is telling me that the job's over. Anyway, so yeah, I can detach from this session, and I can, if I do tmux ls, there's my one session that's running. And if I want to create a new session, I just type tmux again. I don't type attach. But now I have another tmux session running. And I can do tmux ls. And it shows me that I have 2 sessions, session 0, which is detached, and session 1 that is attached. So if I detach from this one, so Control B, D, detaches me, and I type tmux attach, and then tmux ls. Well, I can see in the bottom corner that I'm attached to session 1 by the in the green bar. There's a 1 in the square parentheses. So every time I type tmux attach, so I'll do it again, tmux Control B, D to detach, and tmux attach, it's always connecting me to session 1. And what if I want to go back to session 0? Well, what I do is I'll detach now, and I'll do tmux attach, and I'll add the extra flag -t and then the session name. So in this case, it's 0. So now I'm attached to session 0, and I can see my prime number output and the stuff that I was monitoring before. And similarly, I could attach to session 1 explicitly, and that works too. Now, what if you're not going to remember what 0 and 1 mean? What kind of work is being done? Well, you can rename your sessions with Control B $. And so I'm in session 1. At the bottom, you see that orange bar. It says rename session. So I'll hit my backspace key, and I'll say, okay, well, maybe I'm doing some chemistry in this. So I'll call my session. I'll give it all lowercase. I'll call this one chem. And so now when I do tmux ls, I have 2 sessions, session 0 and session chem. So if I detach again, Control B, D, I can attach to session 0, and I can give it a nice name too. So I'll call this one primes for prime numbers. And yeah, so now tmux ls tells me that I have 2 sessions, chem and primes. And if I want to, connect to session chem, I just do tmux attach -t for the session name, and then I can type in chem, and now I'm working on presumably chemistry stuff. So yeah, there's various reasons you might want multiple sessions. So in the little example here, I had 2 completely separate topics that I'm working on, primes and chemistry. That might be a good way to maybe separate your choose. That might be how you choose how you separate your sessions based on maybe what project you're working on. tmux has another way to separate work, and this is in something called windows. So this is if you look at this sort of cheesy graphic that I made here, I have a bunch of stacks of windows, and we can create a new window, so a new stack of panes that we want to work on. So let me just separate this into a few panes first, so that we can see the difference between 2 different windows. So I have one window, it's called 0, and you can look in the green bar, it's a window 0 and it's running bash, but I can do Control B C for create new window. Now I have 2 windows. So if you look at the green bar, I have 2 windows. One's called 0, it's bash, has a minus sign after it. I have another window, it's called window 1, it's also running bash, and it has a asterisk. So asterisk is always the current window. And if I want to switch between windows, I can press Control B N or P for next or previous. So Control B N takes me to a window, and it cycles around the end of the list of windows. So Control B N, Control B N, Control B N, switches between the 2. And what the heck, I'll create a 3rd window.
You can also select the window number directly with Control B and then the window number. If you don't want to do the cycling.
Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of ways of doing different things, and often there's more than one. I'll be honest, I'm not going to remember what window has which number, so I never use that feature, but I do use next and previous. But you can, if you want, so like I mentioned, 0 and 1 may not be that memorable, or at least certainly with the word bash, bash, bash on each window. You can switch the name of your windows too. So I can do a Control B comma. And so yeah, to rename a session was Control B $. To rename a window, it's Control B comma and I can give a name like programming. And I can switch to the next session, and I can give that another name like batch. So for batch submitting, and then another one, I'll go to the next window and maybe call that one monitor. So I did Control B comma again, and I type in monitoring. So I have 3 windows now, one called programming, one called batch, one called monitoring, and I can use these various windows for different purposes, and they're all within the same session. And as Marie mentioned, I could do Control B1 to switch to window 1, or Control B2 to switch to the monitoring window, or Control B0 to programming. But yeah, in my own case, I just naturally reach for Control BN. And sometimes I do Control BP, but mostly I just cycle through my windows with Control BN, because I don't like remembering a lot of hotkeys. If there's something else that does the same thing, that's usually what I reach for. So there's and I'll mention that near the end of the talk that, yeah, I'm covering some very basic usage in this webinar. And for me, when I learn a new program, I try and learn as little as possible, and then start running with it. And then maybe later I'll start looking up some new features as I need them. But so yeah, and here's a new feature that I just discovered while working on this course, and it's called Control BW. And it will browse all the windows, not just in this session, but in every session that I'm running of tmux. So I press Control BW, and I have this weird split screen now. Now, if you look at the top, I have my 2 sessions here, one called primes, and it's got 1 window, and another one called chem, and it's got 3 windows. And I can switch. So I'm moving up and down with my arrow keys. And once I find a window that I want to join, so maybe I'll join the prime session in the only window that's in there, I can press enter, and it'll take me to that section. So I can do Control BW again, and navigate to the window that I want in the session I want, and switch around that way. So it's kind of a nifty feature I've just recently learned about. Okay, so now let's do another demo. So I'm in the chem window right now, in the batch window. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an interactive job. So if you're not familiar with interactive jobs, they're pretty cool, especially when you're developing your batch work. Batch jobs interactive jobs are really handy for setting up your work and figuring out, trying to debug problems with your scripts and stuff like that. So I'll set up some, I'll ask Slurm for certain resources. Let me just split my screen right now. And just to compare with what's in my submission script for batch. So you'll see I have the various things that I'm asking Slurm for in my scripts, in my submission script. Well, I just add them to the command line in salloc, and I can specify my resource needs. And again, I'll use an account. I'm going to try CC debug this time. It's going to work. If it doesn't run in 20 seconds, I'm going to switch to a different account. Okay, that wasn't 20 seconds, but I'm really impatient, so I'm going to try a different account. This is a problem when doing live demos. Sometimes you don't, sometimes the cluster's busy and you don't get what you want. Okay, I got one more account up my sleeve. Well, so this is actually a modest job. It's only asking for one CPU and 1 CPU's worth of memory. So I guess the Cedar is really busy today or something.
No, it's usual on CIDA. So if there are a lot of resources in the interactive queue, it still can spend, you know, up to 10, 20 minutes sometimes just
Oh
waiting.
dear.
And there are resources idle.
Well, you know what I'm gonna do then? I'm gonna detach and go to Graham. So detach, leave Cedar. Let's see if I can get one on Graham. And so my session, my tmux session is still running, so I'll attach to it. And let's see how we do here. So I'll this time I'll copy paste rather than having you guys watch me type it again. Please, 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 please. Yes, okay. So as I mentioned, it's good to have a backup cluster. You hear that bing? That's my phone. When I work on interactive jobs, I have it set up so it sends me a text message when I finally get my job running, because quite often I'll set up like Alex said, if you have to wait 20 minutes for an interactive job, yeah, you kind of forget about it. You go working on other things, and the next thing you know, your job is started, and your interactive job is started, and you're not there. But I have it set up so that I think my Cedar job started too. I just got a second text message, and yeah, so that's one way to avoid that problem, is getting a text message. And most cell phone providers provide a email address, which is your phone number, for example, your phone number at bell.ca or something like that. And it'll send you, when you email that address, it'll send you a text message. That's the only trick that's going on. Okay, so yeah, what was I doing again? Okay, yeah. So, you know, I might have it set up so that, you know, in this job, I'm developing a program, or you know, I'm not going to attach to my interactive job in these other two windows, but maybe I'll start working on some source code files. So I have something called, oops, I have to cd to the right directory, scratch, webinar. So I'll just mention that with tmux, whatever directory you're in when you start it, that's where all of your windows will open. So in my case, I started tmux in my home directory. But if, you know, I probably should have started it in the Scratch webinar directory, and then every new window would start in that Scratch webinar directory rather than at home again. So there's a pro tip. Okay, so I can, yeah, run Emacs and look at a program that I'm developing. I can run another source code file. And I can work on these two files while maybe running tests on the interactive node. So I'm running my interactive node that Slurm gave me is GRA 39. So I can say, okay, well, maybe I don't want this line of code. Well, before I do anything, I'll just run the script first. So Python main.py, and it provides some output. This is a very Mickey Mouse example, but yeah, I can comment out a line and then maybe do another test in on the interactive node. Now, this would be more meaningful if I asked for more processors or a GPU and I was running something that was pretty intense. You know, I didn't even bother to load my Python module, so that's probably something that I should have done. I'm just using whatever the stock Python is, but yeah, on your interactive node, you'll probably want to do some setup with your modules and stuff, and then run your code, make some modifications to your code, and then test it out again on the interactive node. And then finally, when you have your program doing the perfect thing that you want it to do, that you'll want to maybe wrap this up into a batch job and then submit it through the batch queue. So yeah, interactive work is helped a lot by using tmux. And I'm gonna press exit or type exit or Control D to get out of my interactive job and Slurm will give that core that I got from it to some other user now. Okay. Okay, another trick is, you know, you can use tmux to share the same terminal between two different computers. So I can't really share two different computers with you, but I can share two different terminal windows. So let me see, I'm on Graham, right? So SSH Graham. And I can do tmux ls, there's my session. Tmux attach, and I'm going to use, I don't have to since I only have one session, but I'll do -T0 just to be explicit. And so yes, and I can run commands in one window. And you notice the proportion of the window is a little bit different in the new window than the old one. So tmux sort of fills up the space that's not being used, but with a bunch of periods. But if I resize the window, I can fill that back up again so that they're the same proportion. And yeah, I can make changes in one window and it shows up in the other one, and vice versa. So yeah, that's another sort of a nice to have feature, is you can do this sort of terminal sharing. You can actually set it up so that you can share your terminal with other users on the cluster, but I'm not going to get into that because it takes a bit of setup. But you can change some Unix permissions and allow other users in, for example, your group to connect to your tmux session. And so maybe if you have a new member on the team and you want to teach them some tricks, that might be an interesting way to go. I'm not going to talk about that because there are some security concerns about that, but it's theoretically possible. Okay. Yeah, so here's some gotchas when using tmux. So the first one is, you know, maybe you do an ls and you're like, yeah, I want to copy and paste that for to write it to a file or email it to someone. So I'll just start an editor here, and I'm like, okay, so here's my ls output, and I'll copy it, and then I'll paste it here. And what happens is you get, if you'll notice, when I highlighted my ls output, it actually highlighted this stuff in the other column too. So I've got this mess here of mixed up columns that I've accidentally copied and pasted. And man, I do this a lot of the time. So this is a gotcha that I still get caught by occasionally. Now the way around that is before you do your highlighting or your copying, you can do a Control-B-Z and just make this one pane really big, and then copy it and paste it, and I get the exact output I want without the stuff in the other window. So that's one gotcha. Another one is scrolling up in the terminal. So sometimes you've done some work and the work you've done scrolls up the top of your window and you want to get access to it. I'll just get out of Emacs in these yeah, so there's you know, if I use my scroll wheel, it's doing some weird stuff. It's not going up and showing me stuff that's up above. My scroll bars don't really exist on this terminal. But if I want to see the output that's up above, I can press Control-B followed by square brackets. That's open square bracket. And you'll notice I get this little orange rectangle here that says 0 out of 212. Well, that tells you how many lines are in your back buffer. And yeah, you can start scrolling up. So I'm using the up arrow, but that's too slow. I'll use page up instead. And I can page up to the previous output that I had. Page up and page down, and now I'm scrolling. Once I want to get out of scrolling mode, I press Q. And I can go to a different pane and do the same thing. Control-B, square bracket, and scroll up. And I don't have enough output in this particular window to see anything, but yeah, you just switch to the pane you want and then Control-B square brackets. Sometimes it's nice to do a Control-B Z first, just to make the output a bit more clear. So Control BZ toggles the full screen. And yeah, so that's another gotcha if you want to scroll back. I've mentioned this third gotcha a number of times is where's my tmux session? Maybe you logged into a different login node before and now you're on a when you SSH to Graham, it puts you on a different login node. So your tmux session isn't running there. And the way to get around that is to SSH to, the different login node where your tmux session might be running. So you might have to do SSH gra login 1 or some other login node to find your tmux session first. And yeah, I'll mention another issue that I sometimes have. This one might be a little bit more rare, is I run an SSH agent on my computer, my home computer. And so I use that to help authenticate with various services, and I forward it to the clusters when I connect. So that the key that I run on my home computer allows me to get into stuff like GitHub, and when I forward that agent, allows my session on Graham to connect to GitHub too. And yeah, when I disconnect and reconnect, sometimes that agent connection breaks up and I can no longer access GitHub. So just something, you may not ever see this problem, but if you do, the way around that is just to tear down your tmux session and rebuild it again, unfortunately. So watch out with working with an SSH agent. Okay, here's a question for the crowd. Where should I run tmux when working on the cluster? And I want you to think of pros and cons and trade-offs. So should I run tmux on my own computer? That's option A. Should I run tmux on the login node of a cluster? That's option B. Or should I run tmux on a work node of a cluster as part of a job? So what do you guys think? You can feel free to put A, B, or C in the chat. Any opinions on that? Oh, Rhiannon completely disagrees with Alex. Yeah, so there's lots of options, and I'll be honest that there's no right answer, but there's once again it's about trade-offs. So I run a tmux on my own computer quite often, but not usually when connecting to the cluster. Because one of the reasons is that when I'm running tmux on my own computer and I connect to the cluster, then I don't get that insurance policy that you get. Like if the network goes down, I don't have that insurance. That only works if tmux is running on the remote computer. So if my SSH connection fails, if I'm running tmux on my own computer, I don't get any help for that. So that's
Well,
con.
it can help if X crashes, if you use X. If you
Yeah.
use X11 and X crashes, that can save you then.
Yeah, that's true. So that's another pro for running on your own computer. But I'll be honest, my SSH connection goes down way more than my X Windows crashes. So for me, option B is what I do most of the time. So I log into the login node of a cluster and then I run tmux there. So yeah, that gives you that insurance policy. It also lets you split up your work on the cluster. But you could also run, on a work node, you can run an interactive job, for example, and then run tmux as within that interactive job. And one of the nice things about doing that is you don't have to do those weird job attachment commands, those srun commands, because if it's an interactive job, you just run tmux and you're running tmux on the work node, and that's kind of nice. But the trade-off there is that you have it, if the network goes down, you lose your interactive job. It gets shut down because your session has closed. So there's that's something that you should be aware of. Now you can run in both places. Just keep in mind that you have that Control B hotkey. And when you press Control B, it's like, which tmux am I running in? Is it the one on my home computer? Is it the one on the cluster? Now you can get around that by configuring tmux on one of those machines to use a different prefix. So you could set it up, for example, Control A does the commands on my home machine, and Control B does the commands on the cluster. So that's one way. If you wanted to run tmux in two places, that might be a way to solve that problem of which tmux am I running the command in. So yeah, that's something to think about. Okay, so what didn't I talk about today? So we're right near the end, and luckily we're right near the end of the hour. So I didn't talk about how to configure tmux. So there's usually in your home directory, there's a .tmux file, or .tmux.conf file, and a .tmux directory where you can configure all sorts of things about tmux, including that command prefix key, like Control B, Control A, whatever you want to set it to. You can do that in your config. So I'm not going to talk about that at all. You can Google for that. There's kind of a cool feature for mouse support for tmux. I've used it a few times with mixed success, and that gives you nice features where you can click in the individual parts of the screen to highlight the pane that you want to work in. You can also grab, you can click on, for example, this green line and grab it with your mouse and pull it and move it around. And so that makes it nice and easy for resizing panes. So yeah, if you're a mouse driven person, you might want to look into mouse support for tmux. I'm very much a keyboard driven person. So everything I do, I like to do with a keyboard. So if I'm resizing, I want to do that with a keyboard. I want to keep my mouth, I want both of my hands on the keyboard all the time. I don't want to use my mouse very much. So for me, I don't use mouse mode, but you might like it. There's some really cool plugins and extensions that make tmux look cool. So for example, this green status bar, you can have all sorts of colorful things on there, like CPU monitors and analog clocks, and just some nice visualizations of your windows and sessions. You can look into that. They're out there. You just have to look out and find these extensions. I didn't want to show any extensions today, and I'll be honest, I don't use extensions. I like to keep things simple as possible. And yeah, so everything that I've shown today, there's at least more than one way of doing it, you know. So there I showed Control B, and I can resize something, but there's usually a command that looks something like this. I don't know, is that going to work? Did that actually do anything? I don't know what that did, but there's usually some other way of doing some of the commands that I've shown, and I haven't shown everything because yeah, sometimes it's just too much. Okay, so that's all I got for today's webinar. Are there any questions?